This is TWiT.
All right, let's talk about batteries, because that was the story that kept poor Renee Ritchie working through the holiday break. I'm sorry. This story broke like Christmas Eve. When did it break?
Yeah, it was. Well, I mean, it never really broke. That was the thing. Like, Apple did this almost a year ago, and then there was a Reddit thread about a guy who replaced his battery and got some attention, and then John Poole from Geekbench ran his benchmarks, and it slowly started gaining ground. It was like a snowball just going downhill towards Christmas.
Yeah. So, but as usual, Reddit is, where you find this stuff. This one, 24 days ago, PSA, iPhone slow, try replacing your battery. And so this one has been updated since the original post. Apple at first didn't say anything. There was just all of this information, and then Apple finally said, yeah, they copped to it, yeah. And they explained why. So I'm going to, rather than paraphrase Apple, I'm going to let you paraphrase Apple. What did Apple, they said, we slow it down, yeah. Why?
Yeah, so, all right, so what happened was about a year ago, there was this issue where iPhone 6 and some iPhone 6s were draining fast and shutting down, or just shutting down even when they had charge. And it was a bit of a brouhaha, and Apple eventually made a comment saying that there was a percentage of people who are having this issue, and they were going to make changes to try to prevent it. And it was a bad issue back then because you couldn't even restart the iPhones unless you went and physically plugged them in. They were just off. And so Apple did two things. One, they made it so that the iPhones could reboot without being connected to external power, so that they would come back on. And they made a change in iOS 10.3.2. Before that, they actually did an earlier version of iOS that ran a bunch of diagnostics and tried to figure out what was going wrong, got the information, and then used that to make the update. And what they ended up doing was adding battery health, power management to the throttling mechanism in iOS. And all CPUs are almost always throttled, typically for heat, because if they get too hot, it's incredibly damaging. So the processor will start really fast and then ramp down as the heat builds up inside a device. And iPhones are tiny, tiny little devices. But what this was doing was making sure that as the battery health deteriorated, especially if it was deteriorating quickly due to exposure to heat or exposure to cold or massive amounts of charge cycles, anything like that, it was no longer causing those power spikes, which were causing the device to shut down. So everything sounded fine back then. Apple pushed out the update. Everyone sort of went on with their lives. And then as the devices got a little bit older and the batteries aged a little more, people started seeing profound performance degradation in some of these devices, maybe like by 25% or 33%. And when you're dealing with an iPhone, that's quite a bit, especially because Apple is famous for single-thread performance. It's what makes the interface feel so snappy. And it was not intuitive why it was happening, because if your phone drains or it shuts off, you might suspect the battery and you might take it in and get the battery serviced. But if your phone is slow, you don't suspect the battery at all. So people they didn't understand what the problem was. So this Reddit thread came out and the guy changed the battery and suddenly everything was great. And John Poole saw it, who runs Geekbench, and his wife's iPhone was slow, and he started running all these benchmarks. And it showed that how much certain iPhone models over time were downgrading or throttling the performance in order to maintain the battery life and prevent the shutdowns. And it wasn't all of them. I think the figures that we're seeing is like 33% of them. But that is, when you're talking about iPhone owners, that is a huge number of devices. So that became big news, and then Apple started, to start putting out statements. Yes, we're doing this, what they called advanced power management, which is throttling on the CPU. And then Leo, it snowballed further.
Well, and part of the problem is that there's always, everyone keeps on saying that Apple's slowing down their phones. So there's a conspiracy theory that's been kind of that this is.
It fits very well what people have been saying for a while, which is Apple wants you to buy a new phone, so when you get iOS 11, your older phone's not going to work as well. And that's just to prod you into getting a new phone. That's not for any technical reason. Now, let's give people a TLDR, because CR1 somebody in the chat room said, I had to explain this to every single family member the whole holiday season. So let me try this, Renee, and see if this represents it fairly. Because batteries in phones age.
All batteries age.
All batteries.
Yes.
And at some point, they won't be able to do the things they used to do. Apple, when in the operating system, checks the battery. If it's an older battery, it will keep programs from doing things that are really taxing to the battery. The choice would be the battery will shut down, if it doesn't do this, and that means the phone will so Apple prefers you have a slower phone, as you would probably, a slower phone with an old battery
that still makes
a phone that crashes all the time.
Or that still makes phone calls.
And this I learned today, Apple's software checks the battery, and if you put a new battery in,
it immediately gets better.
It immediately will speed up. So it's not that the phone is old, it's that the battery is old.
And it should, like, the iPhone, this only affects iPhone 6, iPhone SE, iPhone 6S, and with iOS 11.2, they're starting to bring iPhone 7 into it as well. If you have an iPhone 5S or earlier, it will still shut down. And this is not unique to Apple. There's reports as of yesterday of Samsung Galaxy Notes shutting down. Well, and there's old stories.
So this is the second story, which is HTC, LG, Motorola, and Samsung, all Android handset manufacturers said, well, we don't do this, which led more fuel to the fire because...
But no, because like if you go back a couple, even like OnePlus earlier this year and several years ago, Anantech and Geekbench caught them never running their CPUs at peak, only for benchmark apps would they run them at peak. And the reason Samsung gave in their statement was because they didn't want to overload the GPU or the CPU. And that's the same. We have increasingly desktop quality processors in devices that have teeny tiny little phone sized batteries, and you can't balance those things. You only have to make choices about which one you're going to prioritize.
You do in fact see this on even laptops. You'll get an i7 on a laptop, but because of thermal issues, you'll never see it run at full speed. It'll always be somewhat slowed down. So this is similar to that.
And iPads will, like iPads, the battery is so big that it doesn't, people have been asking about that a lot. iPads, the battery is so big, the density is so high that it never hit, even when the batteries have to get really, really old before you start seeing any unexpected shutdowns or degradation.
So they don't do this in iPads. They only do this in iPhones.
No. Yeah,
I thought the SE was fairly modern, but I guess it's an iPhone 6S.
It's the iPhone 6S platform. So it's the 6, 6S, SE, and now the iPhone 7.
But you wouldn't see this on a brand new SE or an SE that's less than a year or so old. How old does the battery have to be before you start to see this?
Apple will only replace it when it hits 80% capacity, which is the magic number for them. But you might see this when it starts getting to around 85%, which was also part of the problem because Apple Care didn't really understand it, and they were refusing to replace batteries that didn't hit that magic 80% number. Even though damage is not always consistent, like if you put your iPhone on a radiator or leave it out in the heat in Arizona or on an air vent, in a freezing cold New England day, that heat damages that battery far greater than its age might otherwise indicate. Yes.
So Apple got some heat, if so to speak, at first for the conspiracy theory that they were doing this on purpose. Apple's explanation seems to have calmed most people down. But people are still mad at Apple, saying you should have communicated this.
Well, people are suing them.
And there's a $999 billion lawsuit against Apple.
So I feel really bad about this because Apple did, like, I don't know who was briefed, but Apple did briefings for iOS 10.3.2 and their phone briefings where they sit you down, and Apple's marketing team are incredibly smart. A lot of them have engineering degrees. They really know their products. And they explained the issue and what they were doing to it. And they talked about advanced battery power management. And I never asked what that meant, and I didn't bother to explain it. But there's no magic involved.
They didn't hide it. They just nobody asked them.
Well, but
they should have expressly said we are doing exactly A, B, C, D in order to fix. But the term they used was advanced, and I know what power management is because they throttle for thermals, and I understand basically how the system works, and it never occurred. They never explained it. I never asked. Yeah. And a year later, I feel like a complete moron. And it's not entirely on me, but I do feel my responsibility.
No, that's totally beside the point. It's like I just last month or the month before, my MacBook battery started to die, and I got a warning from the operating system saying, "Hey, your battery is starting to become really, really unhealthy." Followed by, "Hey, your battery is definitely broken. You definitely need to get it replaced right now." So we have to wonder what Apple's excuse was for not putting up some sort of a dialogue or some sort of a checkbox at some point saying, "Hey, I noticed that your battery is really, really old. I think you're going to want to take it to get the battery replaced soon." It's also making sure people know that if you go to the Apple Store, they'll charge you only about like $99 out of warranty, $79 or something when it's closer to warranty. Or at least just inform people that this is what's going on and this is what we're going to do to make your experience better. And that people would have liked that, as opposed to all the people that in the past year have come to me saying, "Hey, my battery, for some reason, my phone is really, really slow all of a sudden. I don't know why that's happened." And people leaping to the conclusion that Apple has intentionally slowed down my phone because they want to get me to buy a new one. At which point, I have to explain to them that Apple is really, really good at making you make an emotional decision to buy a new phone without crippling your old one. I mean, this was clearly a problem over the past year, and was something that as simple as tell the pilot the status of their aircraft at all times. There's no reason for Apple to have hidden this from the user. So it doesn't matter whether Apple should have briefed the press or briefed other people about what was happening last year. You tell the user that I'm going to make your phone go really slow right now, and this is why I'm making that happen. And if worse comes to worse, if you would rather just have the phone die at 40%, that's up to you, but here's what's happening with your phone and what we want to do about it.
So there was a problem with this, though. There was a dialogue. Apple did put it into the battery settings, but it wasn't a pop-up. You had to go look for it. And also, it seems to be triggered way too late in the cycle. Like, you seem to be down throttled well before that dialogue. I was actually talking to John Poole on a podcast. He's like, I never got a dialogue. And there it is. It happened
so he saw it. How funny.
Yeah,
how funny.
Which was much later than when he ran all his tests, which isn't really helpful to him.
Right.
And I think it almost would have been better if Apple let your phone fail once. So you absolutely understand the problem. And then when it came up, it said your iPhone shut down unexpectedly. We can manage this so it won't happen again, but you will have reduced performance. Do you want to do that, or do you want to make a Genius appointment?